You are listening to the Talking Right podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is your host of the Talking Right podcast, John Mosman. I really wanted to start off with something different and new when I came into this process of, when I came into the process of wanting to figure out what to do with this podcast, and I started talking about politics, and I just felt that politics just wasn't what I wanted to get into, and I thought what I wanted to really talk about was issues of faith, most importantly. And politics may take a role in it to some degree, but I don't want to be, getting into arguments or debates about A, B, C, or D. I intend to speak truth. I intend to speak of wisdom. But I want to do it in a more positive, profound way than I have before in my life. And while we will talk about theology, we will talk about some heavy stuff, I want to also talk about things that matter to people in their life. Because faith is not something that's just something outside of your life, right? And we get this feeling a lot within the Christian community. You go to church for an hour, and then you come out, and that's it, right? I've done my time. It's almost like a prison sentence, and it is a living faith. And I sometimes I had to be careful with using things like the living faith or living out your faith. Just because those are some of the expressions that can lead people, unfortunately, to believing in Pelagianism. It can make them believe in putting more into themselves than putting into Christ. And that's never a good prognosis for a Christian. So, we're here talking about the church and sexual addiction. In my first podcast, this is the new revamped Talking Right, and yes, I wanted to keep Talking Right because I like the name Talking Right for a podcast. I think you can still talk about what's right in the world, what's right about our faith, what's right about some of these profound truths which have been preserved throughout time, something that I think a lot of people also, at times, forget. And then there's also the issues of talking right about what's right when right is right. And that's something that's extremely hard to do in our day and age, especially when society and our culture tells us that certain things are right when they're not, when they tell us certain things are permittable when they're not. We can talk about that from a different perspective all you want, but in the end, we have to acknowledge when we do wrong. We have to acknowledge when we're in sin. We have to acknowledge when we do something that puts our faith and puts our lives in jeopardy. And unfortunately, I don't think, as I said in the previous podcast, the church community, but especially the Christian evangelical community, which seems to deal with, and I don't consider myself part of that. So if you thought that I did, or if you think that I'm including all American Christians or all Protestants, please don't. I will go into that another time into how I define some of these labels. But when you look at overall the evangelical Christian world, most of it is dominated by certain Protestant ranks, but most of it is dominated by unaffiliated churches that don't have a particular doctrinal stance, or churches that don't have a certain don't belong to a certain sect or denomination. But there's just been this idea, and part of it has been infused with the American culture of doing right. And discussing issues of sin and discussing the issues of the human conflict that we have, and the human conflict between man and God, and the conflict between man and man. And we've just, unfortunately, summed it up to talking about what's right and wrong, what's morality, and those things are important. But we can't lose face that as human beings, we are afflicted with a disorder. We are afflicted with this issue that we were born with, this curse, if you will, this sin. We sin. And even when we think that we're not sinning, even when we think that what we're doing is okay, it's not. That's the whole problem with the world that I was just telling you about. How our society can be okay with something like gay marriage, and it feels good, and it feels right, and it seems to be okay because it's about two people loving each other. And I don't want to get on people, to me, the gay marriage issue has been way too politicized, and I'm not going to get into that argument and debate. But for myself, what I'm saying is this. We're told that if people love each other, that, this is a kind of love. What I'm focusing on here is what people call love, what people call right. And people's ideas of what love is, and people's ideas, society's ideas, are a couple of things. One, they're written with a sinful idea or a sinful lens. You can think about us having maybe glasses, okay? And the lens of those glasses have a fog on them. They have a bit of gunk on them, right? Sin is that gunk. It makes you can see some things, but you can't see them clearly enough because you have that lens all clogged up. We see everything in those lenses. So we're not already going to get a clear enough picture about what a love relationship is all about, or what something is that's right or wrong. It usually tends to be towards what makes us feel good. In fact, our society has been built on that. The modern sexual revolution of the 20th century was all about the Kinsley revolution, was all about what made you feel good, right? And I could go into very grotesque, very graphic language about how that kind of thinking has helped to continue to perverse the Americans' society and other people around the world in what is love. What's a loving relationship? When we hear the word "let's make love," right? We're talking about intercourse. Usually, when most people say "let's make love," the idea of what making love is in a movie is completely different than what it is between two people who love each other. It's completely different than people who just have a one-night stand. You cannot say that two people who have a one-night stand are making love. So what is it that makes it love? We're going to talk about that in the because these kinds of things are things that I'm going to be tackling, and this may be the end of our church and sexual addiction series for now, but I'm going to continue to graze the subject because it is something that is very important to me. It's something that's very important for Christianity and our culture, especially now, right? Especially now that we have a society that's so revved up. The atheist, the agnostic, the anti-religious settlement are all revved up, right? And if you do anything wrong, or if you say something like gay marriage is wrong, or if you say something like ... is wrong, then what ends up happening? Well, what's going to end up happening is that you're going to be labeled as a hater. You're going to be labeled as someone who doesn't know what love is. You're going to be labeled as someone, especially if you have yourself an issue. We've seen this happen with this lady out of Kentucky with the whole marriage license issue, and she had multiple husbands, and she has just been now cannon fodder for the left and for people who are agnostic atheists who are really trying to push this issue. So not only do we as Christians have to worry about the fact that there are people out there who are actively seeking to take what words we use and to twist them because they are already twisted people to begin with, and I don't mean by them personally. A lot of these people can be very nice people and be very smart people. but it's the sin that twists you. It's the sin that twists your perception of what reality is. It's sin that twists what you think is true, right? And we're going to go into that a little bit as well in the upcoming podcasts. But when I talk about church and the sexual addiction, what I'm talking about the solution. Because last time we talked about the problem, we talked about we have to address the problem. We have to address that it's a problem mostly for men who are Christian. We have to address the problem that it's mostly happening in places like America. It's happening because of sin. It's happening because of the devil. It's happening because the world and culture, especially the American culture, which has really right now been revved up by Hollywood. It's revved up by corporate America and telling us what we should see, what we should eat, what we should do, what we should be. All of these things have revved us up to this point. And it's funny, if you've ever seen the TV show Mad Men that used to be on AMC, it was all about, first of all, very sick men, very perverse men who dominated the advertising in this country for 20 years, who helped to push sex into people's houses, used sex to push women to buy certain clothes or makeup, yada, yada, yada. You get the point. Okay, so what does this have to do? What does this have to do with anything? Well, that's a great point. The great issue here is that we know that these things are causing the problem. So what is the solution for us who are struggling with that? For those of us who are struggling with this problem? First of all, we have to address that we struggle with the problem. Once we struggle with the problem, I recommend that you talk to your pastor. Hopefully it's a good pastor. And I recommend that you talk to others in your community, other Christian men that you know that are good friends, who can advise you, who are going to lift you up and encourage you to do the right thing. Because you have to realize that if you're going to be a man, and you're going to be a Christian man, and you're going to be a married Christian man, these kinds of things, this kind of sexual perversion, addiction to porn, going on sites like Ashley Madison, and then just being dominated by a oversaturated sex market that tells us that sex is good to buy whatever we want, whether it be beer, tampons, condoms, makeup, or whatever people are trying to sell you. The issue here is this kind of sexual problem and the way that sex is being defined now in this country and the way it's being pushed, it impacts your life severely. It impacts your faith and it impacts your relationships. And, you know, one of the things that has been talked about overall in the porn situation, and this is taking away the whole Christian dynamic here for a second, has been the fact that it does minimize women, and it does. It makes them into sexual objects. And it seems that we've done this a lot in our society, has made women sexual objects, and women have finally gotten to a point that said, okay, I'm going to own up to this. I'm going to own up to this and be that kind of person. There are actresses out there right now, I can tell you one, I'm not going to tell you her name, but if you've watched any kind of news, and if you have a subscription to HBO, you'll know who I'm talking about. This, I don't know if I can call her a woman. This lady, this female, has pushed an overt sexualized idea of what women are. And women have, in order to have some kind of liberation, right, part of the feminist liberation movement that has occurred, have owned up to it. At first they fought it. At first they did fight being sexual objects. But then women said, let me use that, because I realize that is a power that I have, and I'm not going to let go of that power. And so they've owned up to it. It's important that we say that if you're going to fight this, if you're going to get past it, here's a solution. And that solution, my friends, is a very Well, I think it's a very simple solution. If you think about it, I think you'll find that it's there for you if you should choose it. And when I get back, we're going to talk about those solutions and how you can get those solutions to help you. We'll be right back.
Like what you're listening to? Then visit johnmosman.net for much more.
Welcome back, John Mosman Show, the Talking Right podcast. I'm your host, John Mosman. Go to my website if you like to more information on my podcasts or my blogs. So I said before the little break that we took that what are these solutions that we have to get? Well, I can tell you what those solutions are, okay? Those solutions are relatively simple. Okay? What we say, well, how do you get those solutions? Well, I'll tell you how you get those solutions. Those solutions are very easy. Okay? The solutions to these problems are with prayer, counseling of your pastor, seeking the Word of God, and being truthful to yourself. That's what you can do on an individual stance. From a more communal stance, we have to get together and let's be open. I came out on my last podcast we talked about on the part 1, and I've done it before on the internet. I came out and said I was addicted to porn. I had to add that. I had to own that. I had to accept that was a problem for me. And we as a community have to accept that more. And it's getting harder to do that. So what do we do to do that? Well, we need to continue to fight this cultural idea that over-sexual stimulation, that over-sexualization of now our young adults, because we're now seeing poll numbers and results saying that kids as early as 11 or 12 are now engaging in sexual acts. We have to remember why purity and chastity, these things are important. We have to remember what sexuality can do, because it's important. It is really important. And sometimes when we talk about sexuality in the church and we talk about it from a Christian standpoint, I think sometimes we get a little lost on how the message should be told. Because, again, this is a problem, I think, of the evangelical Christian conundrum, which is to only put it as a moral issue, right? Well, you got to be a good little boy and not engage. Well, if you tell someone to be good and not to do something, it's going to be in their nature to disobey. And that's part of the reason that I think evangelical America right now has kind of lost about the whole idea of what sin is about, right? The fact that we're in open protest to God. We're in constant conflict between what God wants of us, what our neighbors and friends want of us, and what we want for ourselves. And that we're always going to go for ourselves. And usually, whenever we think that we're doing charity, whenever we think that we're doing something right, we usually have a selfish motive for doing it, right? I mean, how many times have you thought, well, I'll help out at the soup kitchen because I can put it on my college resume, or I can do it community service, and that can help towards maybe a political career, or how many times I can do that and then, let people know. Okay, it's so easy for the selfishness of men and women to overtake them. And so we have to realize that you can't just say, well, okay, now that we have, because we are human beings, we're in a fallen state, and our bodies were designed to have sex. When you add all of those things and you combine them, then you get to understand that men, that's why we call ourselves sheep, in the context of Jesus being our shepherd, because of how easy it can be lost. We can be lost, how easy we can go off the cliff, and how easy it is to do it. And to just sit and say, well, we shouldn't do it, or we need to wait for marriage, or we need to, and not teach people why they're going to at one point in their life think about doing it, and talk to them and see where they're at on it. It's hard. I'm not going to pretend that it's not hard. I'm not going to pretend that, we could just take a magic pill now. There's people outside of Christianity that think that we think that way, and I'm sure there's something, quote-unquote, Christianity that do. But that's not the way to think about it. That's not the way most Christians I know think about the issue. It is a very difficult issue to deal with. But we cannot pretend that our sinful nature will not want to be curious by it. I told you that I was curious about porn, and the curiosity was enough for me to get swelled into it. This is important, because the solution for us is to be clear about what dangers lie within sexual addiction, and then also to talk about the fact that whatever your sexual addiction is, whatever it be to porn, whether it be to having an affair, whatever thing happens that allows you to lose your sexual purity, if you will, and I'm using that term loosely here, but whatever it does, because here's the thing. Now, those who are outside of Christianity are saying, John, sex is a gift. Sex is a great thing. Why would God make us to have sex if he didn't want us to have sex? It's not an issue about sex. It's not an issue about not having sex. It's about, like anything else, having context, right? It's like, can you have alcohol? Well, you know what? Jesus didn't turn wine from water. Does that mean that he was necessarily indicative of saying, now that I've made you guys wine, now let's all get into a drunk orgy? See, that's the whole point here, isn't it? Is that it's so easy to take something that is seemingly Christian or seemingly okay and seemingly good, and then perversing it. And that's what we do best as human beings. And so, as an individual, we know the solution. As a society, the solution, as a Christian community, what the societal question is, and what the most important thing here is that we bond together, we realize what the problem is, and we help each other out. And we don't put our heads in the sand anymore. We don't ignore the silent epidemic that is not only causing people of faith to lose their faith and to wreck their marriages and relationships, but also the fact that we now have a community out there of people who are more than ever aggressive towards us, who are more than ever critical of us, and want to do everything they can to make Christianity obsolete in a 21st century world. And that's something we have to consider, because the deck has never been so stacked, and the odds have never been so big, and the consequences have never been so. And it's huge. And we have a rule on that. More in a bit when I come back.
I'm feeling right to be by your side. I'm feeling ready to have you forever in my life. Don't get afraid when I repeat to say. Don't get afraid when I repeat to say.
You're listening to the Talking Right podcast. I'm John Mosman. I'll be back in a few minutes, but before I come back, I wanted to take a minute to tell you how much your support means to me and what you can do to help support this podcast and everything I'm about. You can go to my website, johnmosman.net, click on the support tab on the far right. It should be under the menu, and you can go to my GoFundMe website account and support this podcast. This money will go to helping make better produced podcasts for helping equipment. And what does that mean? It means this message of hope, this message that is being sent out will be done better. And I can't do it without you. So please consider supporting this podcast by going to my website, johnmosman.net.
Like what you're listening to? Then visit johnmosman.net for much more.
Welcome back. We only have a few more minutes left of this podcast. And I hope what we've talked about has encouraged you. You know, I know that for people who are actually out there struggling, if you're listening to this, I'm telling you there's hope. And it's important. Because having that hope and knowing that you can free yourself of that is huge. Because I know that when I was in that pit of despair, it sapped me. It took everything away from me. It took away my dignity. It took away my sense of worth. It took away my faith. It really did. But you know something? Having a second chance has been great. Not just for my own personal sanity, but also for my faith and the faith that I have had for a long time that's been given to me by God through the grace of baptism, through His Word and means of grace. So happy for that. And you can find that as well. We have to be aware that there's a world out there that thinks that what I'm telling you is nothing really important. Now, I've told you in the last episode that I've done some research, and I may in the near future put out a post on some of this research that I've been putting about the correlation between sexual perversion and people who suffer sexual addiction and everything else that can happen to people. And it's interesting the correlation that has with serial killers. That's just a little teaser. But for now, we're gonna say we did 2 parts of a sexual addiction on here, and I'm really happy about that. That makes me happy that I did that. I'm extremely happy that we have that now. That I'm working on that. But I promise you, there will be more. And if you like what you're hearing, check out my Spreaker account. Check out my Facebook account. My Spreaker account is JOLEMO376. And if you're listening to this via YouTube on my page, subscribe and like. And you'll get more of these on YouTube. And you can find out more information. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll be back. For Talking Right Podcast, I'm John Mosman.